Today we are going to be graphing polynomials. So I'm going to go through the steps in example one at a time. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to find the degree. So in order to find the degree, it depends on the form that it's written in, but usually you're just going to take each one of your exponents and you're going to add them up. So let me show you what that looks like here in example one. So for example one, we have h of x is equal to, this is just an x raised to the first, another x raised to the first, and another x raised to the first. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 means we have a degree of 3. So that means that our graph should turn 3 times when we go through and graph it. Next step is we want to find our orientation. So your orientation is important, okay? In order to find it, you just look for the sign of the leading coefficient. So whether the sign is positive or whether the sign is negative. If you have a positive leading coefficient, then on the right of your graph, it will start above the x-axis. So on the right. If it is a negative leading coefficient, then your graph will start below the x-axis on the right. So let's look at our example here and see what's going on. So our leading coefficient, so what's right here in the front? There's no symbol. So there's no negative symbol, so we know it must be positive. So our orientation is positive. And then what I do on my graph is I come over here, and I'm just going to put a little arrow over here on the right. That means that I'm going to be starting above my x-axis on the right when I go to sketch my graph. Next up, we need to find the x-intercepts or the zeros of our function. Okay, and then you're going to take and you're going to plot them on the graph. So in this example, I have x minus 3. So that means one of my zeros is positive 3. I have x plus 2, so my 0 is negative 2. And I have x minus 1, so my 0 is going to be positive 1. Sorry, I still have this nasty cold I can't get rid of. So I'm going to plot those on the graph. So here we go, 1, 2, positive 3, positive 1, and negative 2. Okay, now for step 4, start on the right, so either above or below, according to what you found for your orientation, and sketch your graph through the zeros. So if you have an exponent of 1, or degree of 1, you're just going to go straight through at those zeros. Okay? If you're exponent of 2, or it's squared, you're going to make a parabola at your 0. And we won't be having any of these, but if you had an exponent of 3, you'd make a cubic function going through. Sorry. So when I come over here to my graph, I'm starting above the x-axis on the right, so I'm just going to start up here, come straight through my 0. Come straight through my 0, and come straight through my 0. How far up and down you go does not matter, but that is a graph of a polynomial. Let's go through example 2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out, again, our degree. So this is an x to the first, and this x over here we can see is squared. So we have 1 plus 1 plus 2, so our degree is going to be 4. Our orientation, our leading coefficient, we can see right here we have a negative leading coefficient, so our orientation is going to be negative. So when I look at my graph, I'm going to start below the x-axis on the right. Then I go through and find my zeros. So I have just x. So for x equal to 0, one of our roots or zeros must be 0. I have x plus 4. So for that to equal 0, x would be negative 4. And then I have x minus 2. It's minus 2. One of my zeros is positive 2. Now you'll notice that x minus 2 is squared. So we call that a double root. Okay, and again, a double root is where we're going to make a parabola going through that 0. So if I plot those zeros, I've got a positive 2, a 0, and a negative 4. So again, at this one right here, double root. So I'm going to make a parabola touching at that point. Going over to my graph, I'm starting below the x-axis. So I'm going to start down here below the x-axis. I'm coming up. Now normally I go straight through the 0, but since it's a double root, I make a parabola there. Then I come down as far as I want, doesn't really matter. Come back through. At 0, it's just a single root, so I go straight through. And over here at -4, it's also just a single root, so I go straight through. Again, how far up and down you go does not matter. And for our last example here, example 3, I have p of x is equal to the quantity x minus 1 times the quantity x plus 5. So my degree, x to the first and x to the first. So 1 plus 1 is 2. My orientation, no symbol in front, so we know it's positive. So in my graph, I'm going to start above the x-axis on the right. My zeros, I have x minus 1. So one of my zeros needs to be positive 1. And I have x plus 5 equaling 0, so it has to be -5. So if I plot those on my graph, positive 1 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, -5 over here. Going to sketch my graph. Starts above the x-axis over here. Single root, so it comes straight through. Turn, single root, so it comes straight through. And that is all for today.